glory shone around upon FC Halifax Town. Shaymen!
Welcome back to another edition of the Talking Shaymen podcast. If you're watching on Facebook, YouTube or Twitter, you are welcome to get involved with the live chat as we proceed further into the episode. And on tonight's edition, we are going to be previewing our game versus Solihull Moors, which is to take place on Tuesday evening. And tonight I'm joined by Ben McPhillips from Solihull Moors, who commentates on games. Ben, how are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Good to be on the show. Should be a great one on Tuesday. I'm sadly not going to be able to be there as the day job gets in the way of going to midweek away games. But it's been fantastic for the Moors recently, unbeaten in the league in 13 now, I believe, but against a side that's only conceded 9 goals at home this season. That's, I mean, it's going to be a really good battle for sure.
Yeah. I do have to say that is a good statistic when an opposition's fans saying that. But Solihull Moors over the course of the season have transformed, haven't they? From the start of the season, being very solid defensively and being very well known to be good on the counter-attack. But as the season's progressed, they've become better going forward more than defensively, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different world at the Moors compared to what it was when we first played in October. Really tight game, if memory serves me correctly, on that day. And I think nowadays the deal with the Moors is they'll battle you and they'll fight really hard, but there's enough kind of lapses at times in Moors games that it's ultimately a sense of, well, we're just going to score more than you. If that's how we have to do it, so be it. They're a very mentally tough side still, but the way that they show that is completely different to before.
Yeah, it does seem like if you score a goal, we'll score even more than you with Solihull Moors, especially when you're thinking all the way back to the start of the season against like Wrexham. You know, Wrexham coming into the game, bringing a large following. You're expecting Wrexham to win with it being one of the first games under the new ownership. And Solihull Moors managed to get a point out of that game, going back to most recently beating the likes of Grimsby away, where Grimsby are starting to pick up a bit of form. There's been a lot of good results, hasn't there, for Solihull Moors this season?
There absolutely has been, and it's really poignant that you bring up the away results because over the last couple of seasons, I think we've only won 9 games combined away from home, and obviously some of those wouldn't have been played because of the pandemic, but it's still a pretty good sample size to compare that to this season where they've already won 8 on the road, and they've found themselves behind and under the cosh at Woking. They've found themselves behind and under the cosh at Grimsby. It's not just like earlier on in the season where they were going to places like Kings Lynn and grinding out 1-0 results and going to places like Hereford in the Cup, for example, and being second best for much of that game, but grinding out a result. I feel like there are so many games with the Moors this season where you might have looked at us last season and thought, yeah, we would have lost that game last season. No question about it. It's a very different environment now. And I think that's been the challenge that's really been laid down by Neil Ardley, is to take those sorts of games where you would have lost last season and say, okay, can you overcome that? Are you better? How much better are you? And I think we found out that we are a lot better, but how much a lot is the kind of answer that we're going to get over the next few weeks. Obviously, we're away yourselves in second, and then at Easter weekend we're going both to Wrexham and to Stockport. So you know that's the biggest of big tests.
Yeah, exciting times, isn't it, for Solihull Moors at the minute? Especially when you're thinking of, like, since the investments come in for Solihull Moors, you've always been challenging towards the top of the table on a consistency basis over the past couple of seasons. How's it come across then, that? Because it wasn't so long ago you were a couple of leagues below. I remember Halifax playing you, I believe, in the FA Trophy. And it was like a huge game for Solihull Moors, and now you're playing the likes of Stockports, Wrexhams. It must be brilliant for you as a club.
It's been absolutely fantastic for the club, and I think for the people around it, there was probably a point where it was like, "Whoa, how has this all come about? This is all so fast." But I think the club has really stabilised in its growth now. I don't think the Moors are really in the kind of situation where, say, Salford were, where they had
Yeah.
loads of money coming in and it was promotion or bust. I think Wrexham, Stockport, and maybe Chesterfield too are in that boat now. I don't think the
Yeah.
Moors have quite that level of money, but they've definitely got the foundations to
Yeah.
sustain themselves as contenders in the National League.
Yeah.
And if they were to get out, which I do believe will happen sooner rather than later, I suspect this year is going to be very difficult because the league is just so
Yeah.
strong.
Yeah.
But going forward, I think there's every chance that they can build on this season, and definitely all the foundations are there for further success. And it's been absolutely fantastic to have Darrell Eales and all the staff around just building up that sustainability around the club. I remember actually when we were in the 18-19 season, the year that we almost got promoted.
Yeah.
And
Player.
someone on the supporters coach, I can't remember who it was talking about how it was really the first year the Moors had been in a situation where they could look ahead in terms of their recruitment, and the difference that has made to the club has really been night and day.
It's great to see, doesn't it, the progression of sides like Solihull Moors, for example, Harrogate, who are now in the EFL. It'd be great to see a side like Solihull Moors progress into the EFL, but it is going to be so hard for you this season with the likes of Chesterfield, Notts Counties, Wrexham, Stockports. The list goes on, and there's like ourselves who, to be honest, don't have the biggest budget in the division, but we're still challenging, and we're starting to get this sort of emotion under Pete Wild that we're trying to get back to the Football League. Because for us personally, we feel we should be trying to get back to the Football League, where for a side like Solihull Moors, it's more happy times to be getting back into, trying to get back into the EFL. We're growing as a club and trying to grow even further, aren't you?
See, I think it's interesting that you say that. I think there's a split on this amongst the Moors fan base. I think everybody's happy that the club is in a far better position than it was, and I think that is something that everyone agrees on. But I think then you get a divide between people that think we're pushing above our weight and we're doing a really good job, and then people that think, oh, we finished second in 18-19 and since then we've kind of been underperforming, and we're back in position to try and get into the playoffs and really make something happen. I think there is in some areas of the Moors fan base a bit of a boom or bust kind of mentality, which I'm not so sure is really fair. I think that this has been, Darrell Eales, when he first arrived, said that he was basically mapping out a 5-year plan to get to the Football League, and that almost came true in year one. And in any scenario where that happens, you're always at risk of going backwards before you can go forwards once again. And I think a classic example of that is you look at AFC Fylde, for example. They beat us in the playoffs that season and then brought all these incredible players only to get relegated. And, I think that's something that is worth having that perspective on, is thinking, yes, we took those steps backwards, but it could be so much worse. So it's really interesting, and it's a completely different outlook to a club like yourselves at Halifax, where you have that Football League history. But by the same token, I think just with the stability that is involved with the club now at the Moors, I think it's inevitable that the intense ambition and to some extent some pressure as well would come with that.
Yeah, and it is talking a bit about stability. For example, Halifax, we got relegated from the National League and we took steps backwards when we're trying to go forwards to try get back into the Football League. And there are so many big clubs, and I can't express anymore, so many big clubs in this division, like your Notts Counties, your Chesterfields, your Grimsbys. You think of us, us two as a club, we're quite small fish in a big pond, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think probably from a historic perspective, like I said earlier, it is a bit different just because of Halifax's history. I mean, when we in the Midlands think of Halifax as football fans, the first name that probably comes to mind is someone like Jeff Horsfield, who I believe played for you guys back in the 90s and then went on to be a legend at Birmingham City. But aside from that, I think the current mentality of the clubs as you said, it is quite similar. We're looking at clubs like Stockport and Wrexham and thinking, that's a challenge. And I think the mentality maybe for yourselves is probably similar, where you're thinking, well, if we don't get into the Football League this season, then at least we can get rid of a couple of those sides, and then it's one of our turn to win the league next season. I think that's really certainly for the Moors, just because it is Neil Lardley's first year as manager, and I think he's probably I don't know if I want to say he's overachieved, because I think that the talent we have, I think we're definitely where we should be in terms of talent level, but I'm just not sure that Neil would have been building for this level of success in year one. I think it would have been year two that he really would have been looking to make such a big impact.
There are different stages in this division for certain clubs. You've got the likes of Stockports, Chesterfields, Wrexhams, the list goes on. Then you've got your Halifaxes, your Torquays, then it goes down probably to Solihull on historic basis. And we're thinking a couple of seasons ago, right, this is our chance to get back to the football. We need to get there. And it's getting harder and harder each season for us to get out. For example, if either of our clubs don't get out of this division next season, then we're going to have the likes of Scunthorpe probably coming down, even the likes of Oldham, former Premiership football club, coming down to the National League, and it's just going to get harder and harder. And if a side like Wrexham or Stockport don't go up this season, it's going to be even more harder, isn't it?
Yeah, but also no, just because I think the league is so tough that if you're dropping down into it, you're in for a rough time. And if a club like Notts County hasn't been able to bounce back straight away, then I think it's too difficult for anyone to do it if they couldn't do it, because yes, they arrived in the league in dire financial straits, but I think when you're such a big name and you can attract such investment, which they eventually managed to do right before that first season, if they can't do it, who can? So I don't look at sides like Oldham, I don't look at sides like Scunthorpe and think, oh, they really worry me as stumbling blocks, because I think they're just the same as anybody else. I personally think that I'd rather worry about sides coming down than I would about sides like Wrexham and Stockport that are attracting this huge investment, and they're able to get players like Paul Mullin, managers like Dave Challoner from the Football League. I think that is a bigger concern than anything that anybody coming down could provide. I also think as well that if you look at this season in particular, I was actually doing a bit of research just ahead of the game next week at Barnet, which is the next game that I'll be covering for the Moors, and I was looking at how the highest number of points by a team not in the playoffs. You go back to 2009, and that's 76 points. And I'm looking back at 8th place there. Obviously, the 17 playoff didn't start till recently, but I'm applying that as if there were 17 playoffs every year. So Kettering in 2009 getting 76 and finishing 8th. That would be tied this season if points per game were to be extrapolated over the course of a full season. So I think, I look at that and I think, does it really get tougher than that? I'm not so sure it does.
It's becoming a regular trend, isn't it, where quite a shocked side goes up into the Football League, goes on to the next stage. For example, we had Sutton last season, we've had Harrogate previously, we've had Barrow even. It goes on, and it's becoming less regular that a big, so-called big side gets into the Football League, isn't it? And you're thinking it is probably most likely that a side like Solihull or a side like Halifax Town go up this season. Like, our viewpoint is we need to get back to the Football League. The size of the town, the history that we have, we want to get into the Football League. Solihull thinking, right, the investment we've had, we want to take it on to the next stage now. And it is looking like one of us two could possibly get into the Football League. And it is very tight, isn't it, at the minute at the top of the table, except in Stockport, who are probably running away with it now.
Yeah, I think you'd have to say Stockport are going to win the league from here. I think that's quite clear. I think that in terms of what you've said about how close it is between the other teams, I think there's always one question that I ask myself when we're heading in towards the playoffs. And I think, okay, one of these teams has got to go through 2, if not 3 games against the other top teams. Who's got the most firepower in them to come out on top, and who's maybe been reliant on 1 or 2 star players who might not be able to produce on any given day. And I look at the Moors and I think if they could squeeze into the top 3, I'd give them every chance of being able to go and win a home game and then go and win a playoff final at Wembley. Just because I think we're just very, very difficult to beat at home. And we've got so many players that can hurt you. You look at the likes of Barnett with his assists. You look at Dallas and Sabara firing in goals. You look at the link-up play with Clark and Barnett on the right-hand side, the way that Callum Maycock at times joins up with that, the fact that he's scoring more goals now. And you look at all that and you just think, well, you've got all those different players to try and stop. How are you going to stop them? But then on the other hand, for the Moors, I think the question is, well, look at all these defensive lapses that they've gotten away with and gone on to win games. Do they get away with those against the top team like a Halifax or a Stockport or a Wrexham? And those are the questions that we'll get answers to over the next few weeks. And I think then that's really where we say to ourselves, we kind of find out, whether or not we definitely think we can go up. In regards to your point about teams like Barrow and Sutton being promoted, I think that's just the beauty of this division, isn't it? You can build through money just as much as you can build organically. Or in some cases, you can do both. I look at Chesterfield, for example, who were struggling with some ownership issues back a couple of seasons ago. I remember a game they lost 4-0 at home to us, and there was a pitch invasion after the third goal almost stopped the game, which we were, of course, massively concerned about because that would have put our 3 points in jeopardy. And I think Chesterfield, since that point, have hit the reset button a couple of times, and they've recruited quite well, even though they've got money. It's only really been this season they've really had the backing to go and get guys like Shamanga. They've kind of built more organically before then, but then you also get sides like you said, like Barrows, like Suttons, that just come from nowhere. And I think that's the beauty. You can have a good manager, a good couple of players here and there, and I think the National League above all is really about executing the basics. I think the teams that consistently win first contacts in both box, the teams that control the play in midfield, that don't make mistakes, they're the teams that are going to do well. I don't think you have to be an outright amazingly talented team. With this season being an exception, I think this season, yes, you do. But for the most part, normally, I don't think you have to be a well-beating team.
For me personally, I think it's been consistent throughout the season. Even this is going a long, long time back now to the 98 season. I remember us going up unexpectedly back to the Football League with a low budget in 98. We were just consistent throughout the season, not dropping many points. We saw Sutton last season. There were Sutton and Torquay who were consistently throughout the season. But does happen where we're getting to the final stage of the season and a team who's in and around the playoffs just comes out of nowhere and just storms the league. For example, last season, Sutton were like between second and third, and it were looking like Torquay were going to win the league. Then Sutton came out of nowhere and went on to win the league comfortably. We had the previous season with Barrow. It were looking like it could have been Halifax, Bromley, Woking until the final stage of the season when Barrow just stormed the league. I know that was jeopardy did affect that season because of COVID, etc. And I know the previous season before that, you're going back to Leyton Orient, who were a big club getting to the Football League. Now, we're going to move on to transfers within Solihull and how it's been going this season in a second. But we're going to move over to the chat before we do go any further, because I know a few of you have liked to get your thoughts in about the game. So, firstly, Stephen Collingwood has come on up the Shaymen, massive game Tuesday. Yes, it is. We've had Joe Murray making himself heard. Hello. We've had Freddie Eastwood, hi all. James Sloan's come on. Hi, Luke. So's a little late. Come on, Shayman. 3-1 for me Tuesday. Harry Kilner's come on and said hi. And then we've had James Sloan again. Now, I think this is a question aimed at you. I was looking at this. Hi, Luke. Could you ask at some point what the situation is with the stadium? I heard they might have to move. They might have to move, I think, because of the airport. Is that true? I believe that's on Solihull Moors.
Yeah, it's not actually because of the airport, but yeah, you're absolutely spot on, James. It's because of the Rover, the Land Rover expanding, and they, from what I know, have always owned the land that the ground is based on, and they've been building in the area over the past couple of years. I don't know if you've, I mean, you might know because you've been to the ground back in October, Luke, where if you come off of the A45, the Coventry Road, the road that goes up to the ground has changed. There's a couple of like islands now that you have to turn. It used to be just like a kind of straight curving road where you didn't have to turn anywhere. So that's just, an indication of how the land around there has changed. And I think this is something that people around the moors always knew was going to happen at some point. The question is now what kind of backing there's going to be, either through investment or within the council, to try and get the moors into a new playing location. From what I understand, there is an obligation from the council to move the moors to a facility that is up to the standard of Damson Park or the Armco Stadium, as it's now called. But I don't know where that would be. It's all going to be very early stages. My take on this has always been that I would like to see the moors play closer to town. I think.
Yeah, I noticed that when I went to Solihull Moors, I noticed because we were looking for somewhere to eat and parking, we struggled with that. I remember we had to go all the way into Solihull, central Solihull, to get something to eat, and then we were rushing, and we only just made it back for kickoff. I remember.
Yeah, it's probably the least accessible ground in the league. If you drive in there, it's brilliant. But then good luck trying to find somewhere to park. If you're going on a supporters coach, that's a bit easier. But if you're trying to get there via public transport or something like that, you're going to have a very tough time getting around to Damson Park. So I think that if the council could help find the moors a site that is somewhere close to town, I almost kind of wonder if maybe somewhere around kind of the back of Tudor Grange Park perhaps would be really good, perhaps for a location. I wonder if that's maybe something that the ownership there or maybe the council have eyed up as a potential solution. I don't know how feasible that would be, but if it would be feasible, then it'd be absolutely brilliant.
I remember we ended up parking on this housing estate just to the right of the stadium, and we were looking for everywhere, and we finally found somewhere. It was convenient once we found it, but packed that road, I remember. But talking a bit about transfers with Solihull Moors this season and the transfer news regarding Solihull, Joel Sabara, now he's been probably a standout player when you're looking from an opposition's view. I'm sure there's other players who you may feel are just as good or offer something different in a different role, but from an opposition's fan, we always look at Joel Sabara or possibly Dallas as a danger man who we need to be looking out for. Now, it wasn't always certain that he'd be seeing out the season at Solihull, would it, Joel Sabara, with Wrexham apparently looking to sign him? There were a lot of rumours surrounding him. Some were saying it was almost a done deal.
Yeah, so there's certainly nothing that's come out from the club that would indicate that Joe Sabara was ever truly likely to leave. But I know that by the same token, the club are not necessarily going to stand in certain players' ways if they receive an offer that is just too good for them to stay. I know that was very much the case with Tyrone Williams when he left for Chesterfield. But I think that by the same token, I think Ty was in a very different position to Joe Sabara. I think Ty was a player that had been around for a while. He'd been through some darker times with the club. Very reliable player, but certainly not somebody that was necessarily irreplaceable, although I was very worried when he left. I think that he was a player that, because he'd been so loyal to the Moors and he was getting a chance to get his big break, I think there was maybe more of an understanding that they could let a player like that go. With Sabara, I feel like it's so much harder to let go of a player just when they're beginning to peak in their performance. I think you want to try and keep hold of them, get maximum value when you can. And I think that the chance for that maximum value is likely to come in during the summer. I think there's still every chance to get whatever value that they could get for Joe Sabara. I must admit, I'm not fully sure of his contract situation. But yeah, some of the talk about Wrexham, I think I wouldn't be surprised if it came back after the season is over. But for now, that there seems to have been maybe a little bit more hearsay than I think is really the truth on that one.
Yeah, was like you just said, was with hearsay and everything, was there ever, I don't know if you know, but was there any like agent talks? Because I know a lot of people were saying it was a done deal.
There wasn't really a lot of talk amongst more supporters about it, from what I'm aware. You do kind of hear certain things. I know there was loads of talk about Kyle Hudlin. The amount of times that I walked past people during the last few games of last season, when people were saying, "Oh, this club's interested in Kyle," and you know, back then, of course, there were no fans at the ground, so the people that you were hearing say that were people that really mattered. And so when they were saying, "Oh, we've received this offer or we've received this interest," you pretty much figured that the player's leaving. And there's been no indication of that certainly I've heard around the ground this season about Sabara. I could be completely wrong about that, of course, but that's just the impression that I've been getting.
I want to talk a bit about recruitment from Solihull Moors' perspective from the start of the season. When you were at the start of the season, who have you brought in who've really excelled at Solihull Moors this season? Has the playing style changed compared to the previous season? Managerial change, etc. Who have you brought in this window?
I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, that's something that I could split into a few different sections, because things have changed so drastically, not just since the start of the season, but even since we first played you guys. We've basically, since January, we've been a completely different team. It's almost as if Christmas was an off season for us, which it's funny that I say that, because we barely played at Christmas. But if you look back to the start of the season, obviously we had Neil Ardley coming in from Notts County. That was something that, as far as I'm aware, well, this has to be true. Ardley was touted to be the manager quite a while before he actually took the reins officially.
Yeah.
They had Mark Yates come in after Jimmy Shan was sacked, but Ardley was always going to be the successor going forward. I think he was really just wanting maybe a little bit of time out of the game before really committing full time to things with the Moors. And so we got Ardley, and I was very pleased with his appointment. And then that first signing was Ryan Barnett, and Barnett was on loan from Shrewsbury towards the end of last season and looked an excellent player over on the right wing for us before he suffered, I believe it was an eye injury in the game towards the end of the season at Barnet. And which is, of course, ironic, Barnet at Barnet. But yeah, he looked the part, very much so.
Yeah.
And then other than him, you had obviously Andy Dallas, the big arrival on loan at Weymouth last season. I believe it was Colchester that he was on loan from. And he scored a good 13, 14 goals for Weymouth that was really instrumental in making sure that they stayed afloat. Of course, there's no relegation, but from memory, Weymouth would have stayed up anywho if there had been. And Dallas was really important and key to making that happen. And he looked really very good early on, did Dallas, but then had a spell where he just seemed to be getting too isolated in games. We would be putting him up against three centre-backs by himself. Remember in particular the game away at Notts County where he barely could get a touch on the ball, and when he did, he couldn't do anything with it because he had three defenders crowding him. And we couldn't really get much going that day. And so he dropped out of the side for a little bit. You had Rooney coming in, you had Danny Newton coming in, and eventually Dallas came back in and won the job really in kind of January, February kind of time with a hat-trick in the FA Trophy game at Southport, then followed by 5 goals in the game against Dover, which, yes, I mean, you can kind of shake your head and say it's Dover, but still, I think 5 goals against any opposition is ridiculously impressive. And Dallas really bossed the game that day, and he's been bossing games since. He's really been excellent, and so that, I think, is really the word that you need to know on Dallas. I'll come back to Barnett in a moment. There were some other signings during the summer. Lewis Maynard coming in on loan from Stockport.
Yeah, he used to play for us at Lewis Maynard. We don't like him anymore. I remember a couple of seasons ago when we played Salford in the playoffs, and he missed the penalty. I remember the Halifax fans that day. Yeah, we don't particularly like Lewis Maynard. I remember going to Solihull earlier on in the season, and we were booing him throughout the game.
See, I didn't know that he used to play for you. So I remember seeing him at Salford when we got beat 2-0 there back in the 1890s when we were both contesting for automatic promotion at that point. But Maynard, we brought in Harry Boyes at left back, and he looked like a very over-adventurous, overzealous left wing back that really should have been a left-sided midfielder rather than a left back, until Jordan Cranston got himself suspended in a incident in the game against Yeovil. Not too long after you guys came to our place, actually, and Harry Boyes came in and never lost a job. He has been an absolute phenomenon at left back since he's returned to the side, and then the other signings, you had Danny Newton come in as a striker who I personally would like to see get more game time.
I remember Danny Newton on that V9 that Jamie Vardy were doing a couple of seasons ago. I watched that, and you're thinking of the likes of Danny Newton and Adam Rooney. I remember Adam Rooney at Salford when he scored against us in the last minute to win 2-1, and he were going like that to the Halifax fans. But yeah, Solihull Moors recruitment, it has improved over the past couple of seasons. Like, I remember when I saw Adam Rooney had gone to Solihull, which I believe was the back end of last season, when you firstly signed Adam Rooney. I haven't really noticed him this season, to be honest, Adam Rooney. Has he really shined? Has he really been given an opportunity when you're looking at the likes of Dallas and Sabara, who have obviously stood out for you?
I think Adam Rooney is probably been mostly underwhelming for the Moors,
Yeah,
and I hate to call out a player like that just because he does
yeah,
seem to love the club so much. He seems to be really
yeah,
settled here. You always see him with his family. He's always smiling,
yeah,
and he does put in a shift. He will do those kind of clever little movements and those good first touches that
hmm,
you don't always kind of necessarily give a striker credit for. You're really just looking more at how many goals they score.
yeah,
But yeah, Rooney has really taken a bit of a backseat
yeah,
to Andy Dallas this season. He's getting a bit more game time at this point just because the Moors have been looking to get a number 9 in a front three with
yeah,
Dallas out towards the left-hand side and Barnett to the right. There's still kind of a battle. Is it going to be Rooney? Is it going to be
yeah,
Newton? Is it going to be Hudlin who's going to be that number 9? Hudlin started yesterday. Newton came off of the bench. Rooney was injured. I think he had a back injury, so he might not play
yeah.
on Tuesday. He might not make it,
Please
but he
don't.
did score in the game at Woking last weekend. So
Yeah,
he's making some impact, and that's always good to see. But I
yeah,
think when you talk about recruitment for the Moors, and I think this is something that I can't stress enough, I really
yeah,
do believe that the biggest thing that's happened to the Moors this season has been the signing of James Clark at right back.
yeah,
And it's not so much because Clark has been necessarily the best player or really the reason as an
yeah,
individual why the Moors have become as good as they've become in the last few months. It's
yeah,
really been the way that that's affected the team makeup. So if you look at how Ryan Barnett, for example, was playing as a right wing back at times before Christmas, looking at Barnett then compared to having Clark alongside him down the right flank now and having that support, it's made Barnett into a completely different player. And it's helped the Moors maintain a consistent back four shape that,
yeah,
yes, has given away a few goals, but I think it's a big part of the reason why they've been able to win a lot of games
yeah,
as well. And, if it works, don't fix it. And I think
yeah.
having Clark around has just made the balance of the whole team into something completely different. And I think that's why we're winning games the way we are now.
Yeah, you're looking though at Joseph Barber, Andrew Dallas, 30 goals between them. Now that has to be the best duo probably in the league, I would say, when you're thinking of 30 goals between each other. That's pretty impressive. But then it does drop down to 4 with Danny Newton. Do you sometimes feel if possibly, I know you've had your injury troubles with Dallas, but if Dallas or Sabah, or even if they both got injured, you would probably struggle?
No, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah.
I think Dallas and Sabara are just the kinds of players that are good at taking the chances that come to them. But
Hmm.
we've been, I mean, if you want to talk about Dallas as a good
Yeah.
example, actually,
Hmm.
you're looking at a player that earlier on in the season, just because of the way that Neil Lardley was playing him, looked lost, looked short
Yeah.
of confidence, short of any ability to get into the right positions because he basically didn't have the chance to get into the right positions, so crowded out as he was. And then you look at Sabara, who I feel like at times is sort of invisible because the likes of Barnett are stealing the attention away. You look at
Yeah.
him with his 6 assists and 2 goals last month. You're looking at a player that can really hurt. You look at Callum Maycock, who's popped up with a few goals
Yeah.
recently. And that's not necessarily to say that the Moors wouldn't miss Joe Sabara or Andy Dallas if the pair were to get injured. But it's not like there have been no games this season where the Moors have won in other ways. They absolutely have. And so I think they could ride out that possibility should it occur. And
Yeah.
I think, as I say, with Danny Newton, a cruelly underused player this season. I
Yeah.
mean, I think last season Moors were ruining several underused players. I think this season the only one is really Newton,
Yeah.
just because with his work rate and the aggression that he brings to the team and his pace. I feel like he's a striker that could really hurt defences, and I would like to see him get a crack a little more at being the number 9 for a more sustained period. I think there would be some goals in him if he were to be given more game time.
We're going to move on to tactics and game plan, etc., from Solihull Moors on Tuesday. But someone that did stand out to me in the reverse fixture that's probably unheard of, and I believe it is Callum Howe. Now, I was doing like a mid-season National League Team of the Season, and I did actually include him, if I believe I got the right centre-half, that is. Hopefully I haven't got that wrong. But I remember that game, and this was just based off that game, to be honest, and how good Solihull Moors were defensively. He was a rock at the back, and I don't believe you've mentioned him yet, so hopefully I'm correct.
I actually haven't, and Howe is an interesting story. I feel like he's one of those that has purple patches, but at that point in the season, Howe was as dominant as he has ever been, and there was a period there for a good 6 or 7 weeks where I didn't recall him losing a single header. And in the FA Cup game at Wigan, he had one of the best games I've ever seen a centre-back play, period. Against calibre, the opposition of that calibre. And Wigan fielded mostly a first team in that game. It wasn't like we just came up against a weakened team and managed to do something. We gave them as good as we had, and Callum Howe was the reason why we were able to do that. He then got injured later on. I think it might have been in the game against Grimsby in late November that he got injured. And since he's come back, he's had his moments, but there's also been some downsides as well. I think one that will stand out just because it was so recent was for the goal yesterday against Maidenhead when he and Maynard tried to play the offside trap, and not only did that go wrong, Howe was then beaten to the inside by Kelly, who then finished it at the near post. So Howe, I think, maybe blowing cold at times since he's returned from injury. And I think that's part of the reason why the Moors have been conceding as much as they have been. But like you say, that at that point in the season when we played you in that first game, I don't think there was a better defender in this division than Callum Howe. And I think when he's on his day, that's what you have to go up against.
What we talking a bit about tactics now? What are we to expect from Solihull Moors on Tuesday? I'm guessing straight in, high pressing. I may have got that wrong, but would you say that?
I'm not sure. The Moors don't press as much as you might think under Neil Ardley. I think the Moors, I think this really lingers from the Tim Flowers days, is that we're a hard-nosed side and we're a bit dirty and we'll get stuck in. And really, when Tim Flowers went and Jimmy Shan came in, we became the complete opposite of that. And I think it was to a fault. And now we're somewhere in the middle of that. Generally speaking, under Ardley, the Moors do try and pass first. They do try and play out from the back. They do try and encourage the press and then play through it or over the top of it if they can. That's usually their preferred route to success. But they're not afraid to be a bit route one, just hang a ball into the air and ask questions of a defence if that's what it takes. And they've also got the likes of Barnett, the likes of Boys, who can make some special things happen on the wings, particularly on the right side, that link-up play with Clark and Barnett. And on Saturday, Maycock in particular did such a great job of joining in and making that a trio down that right flank. That's very difficult to defend. And when you are able to maintain a shape against the Moors, the great thing they can do is that they've got a Jamie Osborne almost acting like as a kind of quarterback of the team, as I like to call them, where if you're in trouble and you're about to lose the ball, just find Osborne and reset the attack. And that's something the Moors, when they are able to keep possession, that they're so effective at. And so the key really to beating the Moors is you've got to try and keep the possession away from them.
Yeah.
You have to be able to try and dictate the game. And there are teams that have been able to do that for a spell, but not for 90 minutes.
Yes.
And that's what you're going to need to somehow be able
Mhm.
to do
Yeah.
if you're going to put the Moors to bed.
Mhm. I picked up a bit on you saying Moors as a dirty side, and I think a lot of people probably agree with you that historically over the past couple of seasons. Now, last season I was lucky enough to be there in person, unlike other people probably watching when we won 1-0, and I remember them being quite dirty that day. I think the recent season before that, the previous season, I believe we drew 0-0. I think, if I'm right in saying that. Oh no, that was when we won 2-1, and the season before that was then we
Yeah,
drew
this,
nil. Yeah,
yeah, the
0-0.
season before that was a 0-0 at our place. I
Remember
think
that?
Danny Wright had
Yeah,
a penalty. I think he
yeah,
blasted it out of the ground,
he did.
and we did everything except
Yeah,
score. It must have been
yeah,
horrendous to be a Halifax supporter that day.
yeah,
How on earth we did not score that day, I'll never know. I've never seen a
yeah,
more dominant performance
yeah,
go without a goal. Certainly not in my time commentating on the Moors.
yeah. Yeah, and talking a bit about those games, they've always been quite gritty games. Both sides been battling. It's not particularly been a pretty football match. Even going back to that 2-1 game where I remember Halifax and Solihull were both battling at the top of the league, and we managed to win, and that was a huge win for Halifax Town that day. I remember when we really started to believe we could win the league that season. Now, talking a bit from our perspective on tactics. Now, I hope you're not friends with anyone from the club who are into their stats and analysts and can tell players certain statistics about Halifax Town, but we usually have the South Stand, which is where the so-called atmosphere comes from and where the drum is, etc., and everything. And the other stand, you probably know this, we're not shooting into anyone. And what we've seen especially over the past couple of weeks, as the town started to believe we can actually go up this season, goals from our point of view seem to be coming in the second half. Because we usually shoot towards the north stand, which is the empty stand with no fans in. And then the second half, because the fans are behind you and they're shooting towards the fans, they're more eager to get a goal so they could possibly jump into the crowd and the celebrations, etc. And for example, Saturday's game, both goals came in the second half. The Torquay game, both goals came in the second half. The Bromley game, the goal came in the second half. And throughout the season, probably 75% of our goals probably come in the second half. And something that I hope I will be blaming you if this does happen, because I know you would have told someone from the club. But when teams do turn us around at the Shay, that seems to be a problem. And we do sometimes struggle when teams do turn us around when you're shooting, because there's more pressure on you to score in the first half when the fans are behind you in the first half, where the second half it's more shooting towards nobody. What is your thoughts on that? Like, for example, if I was a Solihull, you'd probably be wanting to go into the first half trying to nick a goal, so then not too scared of that second half and they're shooting towards the south stand.
I don't know. I think the mentality on that from Neil Ardley's perspective would usually be that if you're playing against a side that's struggling in the table, you want to try and get into an early lead and really try and dent the opposition's confidence. I think when you're in a fixture like this one, where it's second versus fourth, the Moors are scoring for fun, whether if they're 2-1 down late on, they believe they can win. If they're 2-0 down at Chesterfield, they believe they can win. You can't really dent the Moors' confidence like that. And I think also as well, if you look at Halifax and their makeup, they're always traditionally a really strong defence. Even when you go back to that season in 18-19 where Halifax finished mid-table and weren't really contenders at all, but they had one of the best defensive records in the league. I think you have an identity that's even more
Yeah.
firmly
Yeah, we've always
established
had a strong defence. Yeah.
than the Moors' identity is. And so I think we know going into that game that it's going to be a tight one. And so I think that if there's any key for the Moors, it's don't concede early. Try and keep the game tight as you can for as long as you can.
Yeah.
Neil Ardley really believes in the fitness of his side. He actually wasn't afraid to admit that at 1-0 down at Grimsby in the 78th minute, he wasn't sure where a way back into the game would come from.
Yeah.
But if there was going to come from anywhere, it would be through the fitness of the side. And for the winner in particular, a great counter-attack. And so I think the Moors just have that innate belief that even if they end up digging themselves a hole, which in recent weeks they so often have, they know they can get out of it. But I think the biggest key is going to be don't concede early, because that's going to make life really difficult against yourselves.
Now, for anyone in the chat, if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, if it allows you to comment, please leave your score predictions below. Talking a bit about this game up and coming, how important it is for both sides. For us, we feel personally that the league is probably gone now after suffering two bad defeats to Kingston and Wrexham, but luckily we got back to winning ways against Wealdstone. We probably feel now that we're probably aiming to try and get second or third. I'm sure that Solihull's probably fought us towards the end of the season. That's probably their aim, trying to get in that second or third. From your point of view, would you take playoffs now?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I think most more supporters would take playoffs now. I think the simple fact is you look at us in the table and you think they're a really good side. They haven't been beaten in 13 games. They're going to be really flying high, could be a second place team. We, on the other hand, at the Moors, are looking at 6 of the last 9 games against teams that are either going to be in the playoffs or are pushing to make the playoffs, and a lot of those being away from home. So we are, I think, maybe from a fan's perspective, looking down rather than up and thinking, well, we're going to drop some points. Do we have enough of a margin to stay afloat and make the playoffs? And with a record number of points, it would appear being needed to make the playoffs. Neil Ardley says 9. I'm leaning towards 10 personally. I think from that perspective, it's more a case of we're just trying to make the top 7, and whatever else we can get from there is a bonus. But I do think that fixtures like this for the Moor supporters, because we've survived some of the scares that we've survived, we almost kind of look at some of these fixtures as free hits. We're not afraid of anything that clubs like yourselves might throw at us, because we've bounced back so many times before. And if it does turn out that we can't bounce back, then maybe that's just a sign that some of our defensive frailties are just too big to overcome this season, and then we look towards next season to try and fix that. Or indeed, maybe we see you guys again in the playoffs, and we take the chance to reevaluate our tactics. But either way, I think that the perspective from more supporters is that playoffs are a success this season. Anything beyond that is a bonus. And even though we look like a side that could push beyond that at the moment, just given the way the season ends for us, we'd take playoffs right now, absolutely.
Yeah. I think from our point of view, I would take playoffs, and I think this is where it's like a cut-off point between half the fans at the Shay and half not. Some are saying we need second or third because we have been better at home throughout the season. However, having some fans are probably saying just the playoffs, it's a lottery. But yeah, I think if we had that home draw and a bye in the semis, I think that would be so important from our point of view. Because one thing is, I don't want to be going to Wrexham again, to the race course. I never want to be going there again, because it's not a particularly happy place from our point of view. Now, I wanted to ask, how many do you reckon Solihull Moors will be bringing on Tuesday's game?
Not a lot. It's very difficult for us to travel. We're not the biggest supported club, as I'm sure you'd know. Not just because of, I think, what some would call a lack of history down at the Moors, but I think also because the profile, not just as a club, but relative to the area, really hurts us. A lot of clubs a lot of more
Yeah, you've got
supporters
Birmingham,
will be
Wolves
people
and-
that see the Moors as their second club.
Yeah,
Whereas obviously, Birmingham, Villa would be their first club, maybe even Coventry or West Brom
yeah,
for some people. And so I think that it'll be the real diehards, and they'll make the noise that they can, but just because there's so few of them,
yeah,
you will struggle to hear them. But they will back the team to the hilt, and they'll be the
yeah,
people that you see going up everywhere they can.
yeah. Fair play to all the Solihull fans that will be coming if there are any watching this. I'll leave some suggestions for any fans that are wanting to get pre-match food for a drink. There's the Peasaw, which probably most of you know about, quite a historic place in Halifax, with loads of shops, stalls, pubs, restaurants, etc. Then there's the Royal Oak, the Shears Inn, good for food and drink. And yeah, in the shade, there's nice refreshments for away fans. You'll probably be put, I believe, in the East Stand, yeah, towards the end of the East Stand. How many exactly do you, like, given an estimation? I'd probably be saying 80, 90, something like
I
that,
think
possibly
even
100.
that might be
Yeah,
might be a lot. I'm reckon somewhere in the 50 range,
yeah,
maybe a little bit more, just given that it's such a big game
yeah.
and that there's obviously a promotion push going on. But if I look at Grimsby, I think it was probably around the 50 to 60 range. It could be slightly more, but I would
Yeah.
imagine not much more.
You brought quite a lot to Altrincham, didn't you, earlier on in the season? Was it, I believe, over 100, didn't you take there?
There are some games where we've brought a
Yeah.
lot. We took something in the region of about 600 to Notts County
Yeah. Oh,
because of
yeah.
their initiative to try and break the National League attendance record, and we took a
Yeah.
few to Wigan as well for the big cup
Yeah.
game. So yeah, we do get supporters go about, but I think on a Tuesday night,
Yeah.
and it's quite a long trip up. I think that's a tough task. Maybe if it was playoff game, because there's every
Yeah.
chance we see you in the playoffs again, maybe that's a bit of a different scenario.
Yeah.
But I think for a midweek game and still 9 games to go in the season, I think probably not so many additional supporters coming for this
Yeah.
particular fixture.
Yeah, fair play to all the Solihull fans though that do go. I do appreciate. I know Halifax fans will appreciate all the away fans that do come, and I'm sure they will make themselves heard. Finally, what is your score prediction? I know we've had a Wrexham fan for some reason come in the chat. You're free to come in the chat, but I do appreciate it that we're getting fans from other clubs coming in. Hopefully, a 1-1 draw from a Wrexham fan. Yeah, I think I'd probably take that because it would
It's
keep
not
us
going to
above.
be often that a Wrexham fan and a Moors fan will see eye to eye, but I think
Yeah.
definitely we would take that. We'd be very happy with that going up. I think for us it's a bit of a free hit. I think the
Yeah.
game is going to very much depend on whether or not we concede an early goal. If we do concede early, I definitely could see it being a 3-1 to Halifax type of game. If we don't concede early, I could maybe see us grabbing a 1-1. I think it's all going to be decided in the first kind of 20, 25 minutes. And if we do go behind early, I think it's going to be a really big ask for us to bounce back. We've bounced back from a lot, but against a side that's only conceded 9 at home, I think even for us, that might be too big of an ask.
Yeah, I think it'll be really tight. I reckon 2-1 Halifax. I'm gonna go. We've even had a Bromley fan come in the chat now, so we are getting a lot of diversity in the chat. Really, with a lot of fans from different clubs. We've now got Bromley on their way to Wembley. Yeah, congratulations on going to Wembley. I'm sure you will enjoy your day out.
Very glad to see you go in there after you outplayed us as convincingly as you did in that quarterfinal, because I think a lot of Moors fans, we look back at that game on January the 8th at Hayes Lane, where we were beaten 2-1 courtesy of some very silly mistakes. It's the only game this season where I think you can say the Moors beat themselves. And on that basis, we thought going into that game, no problem, we're going to beat you, and you outplayed us completely. So we're very happy to see you in that final.
Yeah, taking over the chat now, the Bromley and the Wrexham fan. So I do appreciate, but yeah, both good luck to both of you in your FA Trophy final at Wembley. We've been and done it, so we're not too bothered about that. I don't know about you. Have you ever been to Wembley with Solihull Moors?
Nope, never been. We got
No.
within 90 minutes in the playoffs a couple of seasons ago. Maybe this time's the charm. We seem to be jinxed in big games, whether it's, you know, the FA Cup second rounds. We've been in those second rounds God knows how many times, and we've lost in extra time twice, once at Blackpool, once at Morecambe. You know, we earned a replay against Wigan in the first round this season on TV. We were 1-0 up and we lost. And just for some reason, we just seem to be jinxed. We've been to the quarterfinals twice in the trophy, lost both of those. We just can't seem to get ourselves into one of those really big occasions like a Wembley final or a third round FA Cup match. We've been knocking on the door so long, and you know, maybe this year's playoffs it is the time that we do get to go to one of those big occasions at Wembley. But who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. And I think, like I say, Tuesday night's game and the games against Stockport and Wrexham, I think, are going to tell us a lot about whether or not that's possible for us.
I think this will probably decide our season, this Solihull Moors game, because then we've got Woking and then Altrincham. The one positive for me, because to be honest, I think Halifax fans, because of our history, we're never confident going into big games like Solihull Moors at home. But hopefully we can get the 3 points and build off that. But yeah, the one positive for me is at home form. And I'm sure as a Solihull fan, that does... you are cautious when you're thinking of that, and it does make you a little intimidated coming to the Shay with that record. But yeah, Ben, I really appreciate you coming on tonight. I do really appreciate it. Good luck on Tuesday, but not too much.
No, you're welcome, and good luck for the rest of your season as well, Tuesday aside.
See ya.
Have a good